Hello, my name is Andre and I am an outings leader with Latino Outdoors in the Fresno region. Today I'm going to be leading you guys on a hike through Nelder Grove, also known as the Nelder Grove Historic Area, which is located in the Sierra National Forest. Today's event is a collaboration between Latino Outdoors and Save the Redwoods League. Before we continue, I would like to acknowledge that we are in the traditional territories of the Awanichi people, also known as the Southern Sierra Miwok people, and also the Nim people, also referred to as the Western Mono people. Aside from volunteering with Latino Outdoors, I am the San Joaquin Valley organizer with the organization called CalWild. And CalWild's mission is primarily to conserve and restore California's wildest remaining places and public lands like the Sierra National Forest that we'll be in today. Nelder Grove is especially interesting because it is actually home to some of the giant sequoias that exist throughout the Sierra Nevada. And giant sequoias, their scientific name is Sequoiadendron giganteum. Another thing I want to briefly remind everybody of before we continue is, right now we're going through some unprecedented times, and while we're all trying to recreate outdoors, for whatever reason, we have to do so responsibly. And one of those things that we can do so responsibly is to make sure you bring a face mask. So I have mine in hand, and I'll use it if I need to, if I see other people on the trail, or we'll definitely move out of the way if I can socially or physically distance myself enough. So here at Nelder Grove, we're going to be jumping on the Bullbuck Trail, and the Bullbuck Trail, according to the sign, is about 0.68 miles, and so a little bit more than half a mile. But before we start going on the trail, there's some pretty cool history and signs back here that we can check out. So there's some pretty cool signs in history that's talked about here. Some of the history actually is part of this cabin and another cabin that you can't quite see at the moment. But there's two historical cabins here that were built in the late 1800s. But even before that, the first evidence of Europeans in Nelder Grove was in 1851 through notes in a diary from a soldier in the Mariposa Battalion, which was part of the state militia at that time. After that, Galen Clark, who is famous for helping protect sequoias in Yosemite to the north of Nelder Grove, visited in 1858 and named this area the Fresno Grove, as it was part of Fresno County at that time. And even related to that, the Grove was actually renamed for John Nelder, who was a retired miner who came to California in 1849. And the Grove itself was actually first surveyed in 1874, but the U.S. Forest Service did not acquire the land until 1928 from the Madera Flume and Trading Company. But the Grove itself did not start appearing into National Forest maps until 1937. Hopefully all of that was some pretty interesting history for you all, but let's keep exploring some of this area. So as we continue to explore the area, you could definitely start seeing sequoias. The one behind me is unfortunately not one that's standing any longer, but nonetheless, you can see how big of a tree it was. These large trees are very iconic of forest within the Sierra Nevada. These trees can be seen on the National Park Service logo and the uniforms. They integrate the cones of the giant sequoia. Well, hopefully you guys learned quite a bit of history. Let's continue on our adventure. So, as you can tell, as we're encountering this part right here, this is a log that was obviously cut on both sides. And this is a pretty good indication that there's been active trail management. Sometimes in trails in this forest and in other areas, there's trails that aren't designated and weren't purposely planned. So some people just accidentally take them or start doing indirect trails. But this is definitely signs of active forest management. So it's a good sign and know that we're on the right trail. So within the Nelder Grove, there are two main creeks that feed through the area. One of them being California Creek, which is what I'm standing by. Another one is Nelder Creek, which is not too far from this area. Both Nelder Creek and California Creek eventually meet up together, and then they both eventually feed down into the Fresno River. and the Fresno River eventually feeds down into the San Joaquin River, which is one of the largest rivers in California. All of these creeks are part of the San Joaquin River watershed, and the watershed is essentially a land area that has all the rain and snow melt that feed into it, a single body of water. An interesting piece of history that's related to both Nelder Creek and California Creek is that originally California Creek used to be called Nelder Creek, and Nelder Creek used to be called Alder Creek, but now, again, this is called California Creek, and the other creek is called Nelder Creek. So on the trail, came upon this small bush or shrub, and I'm pretty positive it's some sort of currant or gooseberry. It has these little fruits and it has little thorns or pricks to it. And let me find it really fast. So yeah, pretty positive it's the Sierra gooseberry. As you can see, there is a large prickly fruit, as my guide says, and that's exactly what it is, a large prickly fruit. And so yeah, this is a Sierra gooseberry, scientific name being Ribes roselii, and it's also part of the same family as the currants. I came across this cool spider, but he's hanging out upside down, so I can't really tell the color pattern on it. So I think I'm just gonna have to come back around and see if I can identify it later. I don't really want to bother the spider right now. So right now we're coming up on this trail junction. And so there's two different trails. We can go check out the Chimney Trail or the Bullbuck Tree Trail. And I think I'm gonna head to the Bullbuck Tree Trail because that's where I think there's a lot more sequoias for us to hopefully check out. So, as you can probably see from the sign, this is a Bullbuck tree, which is to the left of me. This is one of the famous giant sequoias for this area, and particularly the Bullbuck is famous because it is one of the larger sequoia trees that's around. Pretty comparable to some of the other larger trees that are in either Yosemite National Park or down in Sequoia National Park. And as the sign reads, it's about 247 feet high, and it's one of the largest trees by volume with 29,000 cubic feet. And the crown of the tree, so the area that the branches and the leaves spread out, is about 70 feet if it's reading correctly. But yeah, as you can see, this is a pretty massive tree. So while the Bullbuck tree is about 247 feet high, giant sequoias in general can get up to be about 310 feet high. So to compare that, that's taller than the Statue of Liberty just by a little bit. And sequoias can get around 30 feet around the base. And that would arguably take about 6 full-size people laying from head to toe to be able to wrap around the entire trunk. As you can see from this tree, this base is a lot wider, so it would probably take a lot more than 6 people. The term bullbuck is actually a historical term, if you will. That was the title of the people who used to fell, so drop the trees back in the logging days of the 1800s. But particularly, it was the name of the boss of those people. So like the head boss of the loggers. So, this being the boss tree, essentially, if you will. Because it's one of the larger trees. So the Bullbuck tree, along with all the other sequoias in this area, and all the other trees, all the other plants, and the different animals, so the wildlife, and even the soil and the different processes or forces of nature, if you will, are all part of the same ecosystem and this habitat. And this is part of the giant sequoia ecosystem. So all of it kind of, both the physical that's alive and the physical that isn't alive necessarily are all part of the giant sequoia ecosystem, just to give a little bit more clarification. So giant sequoias are one of the longest lived tree species on this planet. They can average about 3,000 years in age, and they are actually the third longest lived species on the planet. with the oldest specimen of sequoias being about 3,200 years old. And that tree was discovered down in the Giant Sequoia National Monument, so just south along the Sierra Nevada mountains. So like I said a little bit ago, the giant sequoias are part of the giant sequoia ecosystem, but not just the animals and the plants that are alive, but also, as I mentioned, fire as a process is part of the ecosystem. And in a second, you'll see some of the toll that fire as a process can take on this ecosystem. So as you can see from this sequoia stump, fire was definitely present in this area and in this giant sequoia ecosystem. And fire was a very important part of the system, as I mentioned, more so, especially because sequoia trees and their cones actually need fire for them to rejuvenate within the system. These sequoia cones are actually estimated to be about 3 times as big, or they can be up to 3 times as big, and can produce up to 3 times as many seeds within the cones as compared to their relatives, the redwoods. But unfortunately for sequoias and many other forested areas and ecosystems, fire management practices excluded fire within these areas. So it's been hard for giant sequoias and other forest areas to completely recover as they used to be. And that's especially known based on many scientific studies and traditional ecological knowledge from ancestral people who called these areas homes. So while fire might not be a very common thing on the landscape anymore, giant sequoias nonetheless had adapted a long time ago to be able to deal with fire being on the landscape and being a process that they have to deal with. As you can see here, they have a pretty thick bark, which is actually one of their adaptations to deal with fire. Their bark can sometimes be up to about 2 feet thick, and more than that, as you saw on the giant bullbuck a minute ago. They have high canopies or high crowns, and that was a mechanism to be able to defend against fires that were more lower on the ground and didn't quite reach all the way up to the top of the trees. So again, the thick bark and the high crowns are 2 important defense adaptations that they had against fire. So as I've discussed, giant sequoias have some pretty cool features that they've adapted to be able to deal with fire. And while talking about features, step down here. Pretty sure this is part of a sequoia root system. Giant sequoias can have their root systems extend about 100 feet in every direction. And obviously, I'm not gonna be able to follow this route, but I'm pretty sure if we were able to, we'd probably find it close to somewhere in that distance of 100 feet. Not quite a giant sequoia, but I still think pretty cool. While I'm down here, this is a sugar pine cone. And sugar pines, their scientific name is Pinus lambertiana. And as you can see, it's a pretty big cone, especially when you compare it to sequoia cone. Pretty big difference. So actually, while I'm down here as well, might as well grab a quick sip of water. Make sure to stay hydrated when you're out here. All right, let's get going. So pretty much reached the end of the trail, which is actually not too far from the bullbuck tree. But if we go ahead and go a little bit further, you'll see that there's the bullbuck tree view, and to the other side there's a trail split off going in another direction. But now that I'm here and we stop and take a look back, it's pretty cool to see the view. Well, gang, this is the end of the trail. So I just wanted to take the time to thank you for letting me, lead you all on this hike. I hope you all had fun and really enjoyed being able to, take this adventure with me. Quiero decir muchas gracias por dejarme de ser guía en esta caminata con ustedes. Espero que se disfrutaron y que tuvieron un buen tiempo. Muchas gracias y hasta luego.